My son yelled, "Her house, her rules." So I changed the locks. It was my house. Those words cut deeper than any knife ever could. My own son, my flesh and blood, stood in my living room and screamed that at me as if I were the intruder, as if the mortgage I'd paid for 30 years meant nothing. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. Before we begin, I'd be truly grateful if you'd take a moment to like this video and consider subscribing to the channel. It helps me keep sharing these stories with those who need them most. I remember standing there in my floral house dress, the one with faded roses that I'd worn 1,000 times while cooking Sunday dinners for my family. My hands were still damp from washing dishes, and I could feel the weight of the dish towel draped over my shoulder. The afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains I'd hung myself 20 years ago, casting delicate shadows on the hardwood floors I'd refinished with my late husband, back when our knees still worked properly. The house smelled of lemon polish and the pot roast I'd been preparing since dawn, thinking my son and his family might actually sit down and eat with me this time. The pot roast had been Robert's favorite. I'd marinated it overnight in red wine and herbs, the same recipe I'd learned from my mother-in-law decades ago. She'd taught me in this very kitchen, back when the appliances were avocado green and the wallpaper had those big orange flowers that everyone thought was so modern. "The secret," she'd whispered to me as if passing down state secrets, "is to add a tablespoon of brown sugar. It balances the acidity." I'd written it down in my recipe book, the blue one with the stained cover, and I'd been making it the same way ever since. But there he was, my 42-year-old son Michael, his face red with anger, pointing his finger at me like I was some disobedient child. Behind him stood Jennifer, my daughter-in-law, her arms crossed over her designer blouse, her lips pressed into that thin line of disapproval I'd come to know so well. Their teenage daughter Emma sat on my sofa, the one I'd saved for months to buy, scrolling through her phone without even looking up. They'd moved in 6 months ago, just temporarily, they said, while they sorted out some financial issues with their investments. 6 months that felt like 6 years. I remember the day they arrived, a rainy Tuesday in April. They'd pulled up in a U-Haul truck, and I'd stood on the porch with a fresh pot of coffee and homemade cinnamon rolls, so happy to have family filling these empty rooms again. "It'll just be a few months, Mom," Michael had said, giving me a quick hug before directing the movers. "Just until we get back on our feet." Jennifer had barely looked at me, already on her phone making arrangements, treating my home like a storage facility rather than a sanctuary I was offering out of love. The text message had come that morning. I'd been folding their laundry, as I did every Tuesday and Friday, when my phone buzzed on the dryer. It was from Jennifer, sent to what I later realized was a family group chat that didn't include me. "Can't wait for Thanksgiving at the lake house," she'd written. "Finally, a holiday without drama, just us and the Hendersons. Peace at last." There were laughing emojis. My hands had trembled as I scrolled up, seeing months of messages, plans made without me, jokes at my expense, complaints about my cooking, my clothes, my old-fashioned ways. One message from Michael, sent at midnight 3 weeks ago, read, "Mom asked again about going to dinner with us tomorrow. I told her we had plans. I just can't deal with her questions about Jennifer's job situation." Jennifer had responded with a thumbs up and a comment. "Your mother is exhausting, always wanting to know everything, always trying to insert herself into our business." Another exchange from September showed them laughing about how I'd asked if they needed help with groceries. "She acts like we're destitute," Jennifer had written. Meanwhile, she's living on a teacher's pension in a house worth $500,000. The irony. Michael's response, "Once we get our names on that deed, we can finally stop pretending." I'd set the phone down carefully, as if it might explode, and finished folding their clothes with mechanical precision. Each sock paired, each shirt smoothed. My chest felt hollow, like someone had reached inside and scooped out everything that mattered. The washer hummed its familiar song, the same sound that had accompanied decades of caring for this family. I thought of all the lunches I'd packed, all the scraped knees I'd bandaged, all the tears I'd dried. And now I wasn't even worth including in a group chat. When I finally gathered the courage to ask about Thanksgiving, Jennifer had looked at me with those cold blue eyes and said, "Oh, we thought you'd want to stay here. You know how you are about traveling." As if I were some fragile thing that might break. As if I hadn't spent years driving across 3 states to visit them when they lived in Boston. As if I hadn't taken buses and trains and borrowed cars to be at every birthday, every recital, every moment that mattered. I remembered that trip to Boston 5 years ago, when Emma was graduating from middle school. I'd taken 2 buses and a train, carrying a heavy gift bag with a new laptop we'd all chipped in for, except Michael had forgotten his part of the payment, so I'd covered it. The ceremony was at 2 in the afternoon, but I'd left at 6 in the morning to make sure I wouldn't be late. I'd sat in the auditorium, beaming with pride, while Jennifer scrolled through her phone and Michael checked his email. After the ceremony, they'd had plans for a fancy dinner at some exclusive restaurant downtown. "It's already reserved for 4, Mom," Michael had said apologetically. "Maybe next time." I'd eaten a sandwich alone in my hotel room, then taken the long journey home the next morning. That's when Michael said it. Those words that would change everything. "Mom, if you're going to be difficult, maybe you should remember this isn't your house anymore. Her house, her rules." He gestured toward Jennifer as if she were the Queen of England. I stood there, my mouth open, unable to form words. 30 years of mortgage payments, 30 years of scrubbing, painting, repairing, loving every inch of these walls. And somehow, it wasn't my house anymore. The photographs on the mantelpiece seemed to mock me. There was Michael at 5, missing his front teeth, holding up a fish we'd caught together at Lake Michigan. I remembered that day so vividly. The sun had been bright, and we'd rented a small boat. Michael had been so excited when he felt the tug on his line, and I'd helped him reel it in, my hands over his small ones, both of us laughing as the fish flopped into the boat. "I did it, Mommy!" he'd shouted. "I caught a big one!" Robert had taken the photo, capturing that moment of pure joy, of uncomplicated love between mother and son. There was his high school graduation, my late husband Robert's arm around his shoulders, both of them grinning at the camera. Michael had given the valedictorian speech that day, talking about family values and the importance of honoring those who came before us. I'd cried tears of pride, clutching my program so hard it wrinkled. He'd thanked us publicly, me and Robert, for our sacrifices and unconditional love. Where was that boy now? When had he been replaced by this stranger who looked at me with contempt? There was Michael's wedding day, me in my best dress, holding baby Emma just hours after she was born. Jennifer had been in labor for 18 hours, and I'd sat in that hospital waiting room the entire time, bringing coffee and sandwiches for Michael, offering support and encouragement. When Emma finally arrived, perfect and tiny and screaming, they'd let me hold her first after the parents. I'd looked into those unfocused newborn eyes and made a silent promise to always be there for her, to love her unconditionally the way I loved her father. When had we gone from that to this? That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after they'd all gone to bed. The house creaked and settled around me, familiar sounds that had once brought comfort, but now felt like whispers of accusation. Had I done this to myself? Had I loved too much, given too freely, made myself so available that I'd become invisible? I remembered Robert's last words to me before the stroke took him 5 years ago. "Don't let them take advantage of you, Margaret. You've got to look after yourself, too." I'd nodded, holding his hand, promising. But promises are easy to break when you're drowning in grief and loneliness. Robert had seen it even then. The way Michael would call only when he needed something. The way visits became shorter and less frequent. "He's busy, dear," I'd say, making excuses. "He has his own life now." Robert would shake his head, that sad knowing look in his eyes. There's having your own life, and then there's forgetting where you came from. Our son is dangerously close to the latter. We'd had an argument about it once, about 6 months before Robert's stroke. Michael had canceled Christmas that year, saying they'd booked a ski trip to Colorado and couldn't get a refund. Robert had been furious. "That boy needs to learn about priorities," he'd said, his face red. "You don't abandon your elderly parents at Christmas for a ski trip." But I'd defended Michael, as I always did. "They're not elderly, Robert. We're only 65, and they deserve to have fun." Robert had looked at me with such sadness. "When are you going to stop making excuses for him, Margaret? When are you going to see him for who he really is, not who you wish he was?" I pulled out the old photo albums, the ones with actual printed pictures, not these digital things everyone has now. There I was, 23 years old, standing in front of this very house the day we bought it. My hair was dark then, not this steel gray, and my waist was smaller, my face unlined. Robert and I had scraped together every penny for the down payment, working extra shifts, skipping meals, dreaming of the family we'd raise here. And we had raised Michael here, in this house that was supposed to be filled with love and laughter forever. I found a photograph from 1985, our first full year in the house. We'd had a summer barbecue, inviting all our friends and neighbors. Robert was manning the grill, wearing that ridiculous Kiss the Cook apron I'd bought him as a joke. I was laughing at something, holding 2-year-old Michael on my hip. The yard was full of people, and you could practically feel the happiness radiating from the image. We'd had such dreams that day, such hopes for the future. We were going to grow old in this house, watch our grandchildren play in the yard, host holidays and celebrations for decades to come. Another photo showed Michael's 10th birthday party, the one where we'd set up an obstacle course in the backyard. 20 kids running around, laughing and screaming, eating cake and ice cream. Michael's face was covered in chocolate frosting, and he was grinning so wide you could see the gap where he'd lost another tooth that morning. I'd spent weeks planning that party, making decorations by hand, baking the cake in the shape of a race car. "Best birthday ever, Mom," he'd said, hugging me tight, leaving frosting stains on my shirt that I'd never bothered to wash out, keeping that shirt for years as a memento of his joy. The album showed birthday parties, Christmas mornings, Easter egg hunts in the backyard. There was the year we built the tree house, Robert and Michael working together for an entire summer, measuring and sawing and hammering. I'd brought them lemonade and sandwiches, documenting the progress with my camera. The finished tree house had been magnificent, with a real roof and windows and a rope ladder. Michael had slept out there every night for a month, until the mosquitoes drove him back inside. There was the year we installed the swimming pool. We'd saved for 5 years, and when it was finally finished, Michael had invited every kid in the neighborhood. Our backyard had become the summer hangout, and I'd loved every minute of it. The sound of children's laughter, the wet footprints on the patio, the endless supply of popsicles and sunscreen. Jennifer had that pool removed when they remodeled 3 years ago, saying it was an insurance liability and a waste of space. They'd filled it in with concrete and planted grass, erasing one more piece of our family history. There was Michael learning to ride a bike on this very driveway, me running behind him with my arms outstretched, ready to catch him if he fell. When had he stopped needing me to catch him? When had he started pushing me away instead? I thought about all the money I'd given him over the years, not just small amounts for gas or groceries, but substantial sums. There was the $20,000 for his college loans when he graduated, the money I'd gotten from selling Robert's vintage car collection, something my husband had spent decades building. Robert had loved those cars, spending every weekend tinkering in the garage, going to shows and swap meets. His pride and joy had been a 1967 Mustang, pristine condition, worth at least $15,000 alone. "Are you sure about this?" the buyer had asked me when I sold it. "This is a collector's item. Your husband must have loved this car." I'd nodded, tears in my eyes. thinking about how Michael was drowning in student debt, how this money could give him a fresh start. My husband loved his son more than any car, I'd said. And it was true. Robert would have sold them all himself if he'd lived long enough to see Michael struggling. Michael had barely looked up from his phone when I handed him the check. "Thanks, Mom," he'd said, already texting someone, probably Jennifer, probably about how they could finally take that trip to Europe they'd been planning. They'd gone to Paris and Rome and Barcelona, posting photos on social media of fancy restaurants and luxury hotels, while I ate alone in the house that felt too big and too empty without Robert. Then there was the $15,000 for their down payment on the condo in Boston before the real estate market crashed and they lost it all. The $10,000 for Emma's private school tuition when they said they couldn't afford it. The $5,000 here and there for emergencies that seemed to happen with alarming frequency. Car repairs, medical bills, property taxes they'd forgotten to budget for. I'd never kept track exactly, but if I added it all up, I'd probably given them close to $70,000 or $80,000 over the years. Money from my teacher's pension, from the small investments Robert had left me, from selling off pieces of our life together. I'd sold Robert's tools, the ones he'd collected over 40 years of carpentry work. I'd sold my mother's china, the set she'd brought from Poland when she immigrated. I'd sold jewelry, furniture, books, anything with value, always telling myself it was for Michael's future, for Emma's opportunities, for their happiness. And what had I gotten in return? Forgotten birthdays. Last year, my 70th, I'd waited all day for a call, a card, anything. I'd woken up early, telling myself they were probably planning a surprise. I'd done my hair and makeup, put on a nice dress, just in case they stopped by. I'd baked myself a cake, thinking maybe they'd arrive for dinner. Finally, at 9 p.m., as I was putting away the untouched cake, Michael sent a text. "Happy birthday, Mom. Sorry, crazy day at work." That was it. No visit, no flowers, no cake. I'd bought myself a small chocolate cake from the grocery store and eaten a slice alone at this same kitchen table, the candles unlit because lighting them seemed too pathetic. I'd sat there that night, holding my phone, staring at that brief text message, and I'd felt something inside me crack. Not break entirely, not yet, but definitely crack. I thought about calling him back, saying something, anything, but what would I say? "I'm hurt that you forgot my 70th birthday?" It would sound needy, demanding. Exactly the kind of behavior Jennifer complained about in those text messages I'd later discover. When I had pneumonia last winter, so sick I could barely get out of bed, I'd called Michael 3 times before he answered. "Mom, I can't come right now. Jennifer's got this thing at work, and Emma has soccer." I'd lain in bed for a week, fevered and alone, until Mrs. Henderson from next door noticed my newspapers piling up and came to check on me. She brought me soup and medicine, sat with me, made sure I was breathing right. A neighbor I'd known for less than 5 years did more for me than my own son. I remember the fever dreams from that week, hallucinations where Robert was still alive, where Michael was still that little boy who needed me. I'd wake up calling for help, and the house would be empty and silent. I'd drag myself to the bathroom, to the kitchen for water, holding onto walls and furniture to keep from falling. My temperature had reached 103.5 at one point, and I'd seriously considered calling an ambulance, but I'd been too embarrassed, too ashamed that my own family wasn't there to help me. Mrs. Henderson had been horrified when she found me. "Margaret, you could have died," she'd said, her face pale with concern. "Where is your son? Does he know you're this sick?" I'd made excuses for him, as always. "He's very busy. He has a demanding job." She'd looked at me with such pity, and that look had hurt almost as much as the pneumonia. But I forgave him. I always forgave him. When he forgot Mother's Day, when he canceled Christmas because they wanted to ski in Aspen, when he couldn't make it to the anniversary of Robert's death because they had concert tickets. I forgave and forgave and forgave, telling myself that he was busy, that he had his own life, that I was being too needy, too demanding, too much of a burden. Mother's Day had been especially painful this year. I'd seen all the posts on social media, families gathering for brunch, children surprising their mothers with flowers and cards and heartfelt tributes. I'd waited by the phone all morning, all afternoon. Jennifer had posted a long, gushing tribute to her own mother, complete with a photo album of their adventures together. Nothing about me. Not even a mention. At 8 p.m., my phone had finally buzzed. A group text, sent to at least 50 people based on the recipient list I could see. Happy Mother's Day to all the amazing moms out there, with a generic flower emoji. That was it. A mass text that probably took him 5 seconds to send. The night grew deeper, and I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, the same tea I'd been drinking for 40 years. The mug was chipped on one side, a tiny flaw I'd grown to love. I held it in both hands, feeling the warmth seep into my arthritic fingers, and I let myself cry. Not the quiet, dignified tears I usually allowed, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook my whole body. I cried for Robert, gone too soon. I cried for the son I thought I'd raised, the one who seemed to have vanished and been replaced by this stranger who looked at me with impatience and barely concealed contempt. I cried for myself, for the woman I'd become, always giving, never receiving, always available, never valued. The tears came from a place deep inside, a reservoir of grief I'd been keeping locked away for years. I cried for every forgotten birthday, every canceled visit, every moment of loneliness I'd endured. I cried for the loss of Robert, the only person who'd ever truly seen me, who'd valued me for more than what I could provide. I cried until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen, and there were no more tears left. When the tears finally stopped, I felt something shift inside me. It was subtle, like a door opening in a room I'd kept locked for too long. I looked around my kitchen, at the curtains I'd sewn, the tiles I'd chosen, the paint I'd applied with my own hands. This was my house. Mine. Not Jennifer's. Not even Michael's, despite what he seemed to think. Mine. I thought about the conversation I'd overheard just 2 days ago. I'd been in the basement doing laundry, and their voices carried down through the heating vents. Jennifer was on the phone with someone, probably her mother. I know, she was saying. But we're saving so much money living here. And once she adds Michael to the deed like we've been pushing for, we can refinance and use the equity for the beach house we want. She won't be around forever, and frankly, she's getting to be a lot to handle. All her questions, her need for attention. It's exhausting. My hands had frozen on the laundry basket, a pair of Michael's socks clutched in my fists. I'd felt the blood drain from my face, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. The heating vent carried every word with crystal clarity, Jennifer's voice tinny but unmistakable. Her mother's voice came through faintly, asking a question I couldn't quite make out. Jennifer laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. Oh, she'll do it eventually. Michael's working on her, you know how he is. He's always been able to talk her into anything. Remember when we needed money for the Boston condo? One conversation and she was writing a check. The other voice said something else, and Jennifer responded, "The house is worth at least $450, maybe $500 with the current market, and she owes maybe $30,000 on the mortgage, if that. We're talking about serious equity here, Mom. Once we get our names on the title, we can take out a line of credit, pay off our credit cards, buy the beach house we've been looking at. Michael's already talked to a loan officer. Add Michael to the deed. They'd been pushing for that for months, telling me it would make things easier when I passed away, that it would save on estate taxes, that it was the smart thing to do. I'd been resisting, some instinct telling me to hold on, but I'd been weakening. Maybe this week, I'd thought. Maybe I should just do it and make everyone happy. But standing there in the basement, holding a pair of Michael's socks, I'd realized they didn't want to make me happy. They wanted my house, And once they had it, what would stop them from pushing me out entirely? I was already halfway to being erased. How long before I became completely invisible? I thought about nursing homes, about senior apartments, about all the ways elderly people get shuffled aside when they become inconvenient. Once my name wasn't on the deed anymore, once I had no legal claim to my own home, what would stop them from suggesting I might be happier somewhere else? Somewhere smaller, somewhere more manageable, somewhere that wasn't my house. The memory of that moment gave me strength. I finished my tea and went upstairs to my bedroom, the one I'd shared with Robert for 35 years. His reading glasses still sat on the nightstand, and I touched them gently before opening my laptop. It was late, almost midnight, but I didn't care. I began to type, searching for information about property rights, about tenancy laws in Illinois, about what rights I had as the sole owner of this house. The next morning, I woke up early, before anyone else stirred. I'd barely slept, my mind too full of thoughts and plans and possibilities. I made coffee, the strong kind Robert used to love, and sat at the kitchen table with a notebook. I began to write down everything, every loan, every forgotten birthday, every broken promise. The numbers added up to something staggering. Not just the money, though that was substantial, but the time, the energy, the pieces of my heart I'd handed over so freely. Michael came down around 8, his hair messy from sleep, already on his phone. "Morning, Mom," he said without looking up. "Can you make pancakes? Emma's got early practice, and Jennifer needs to leave by 9. I looked at him, really looked at him. When had he become this person? When had I become the woman who jumped at every command? The boy I'd raised had been thoughtful, considerate. He'd helped with dishes without being asked. He'd noticed when I was tired or sad. He'd cared about my feelings. This man in front of me was a stranger wearing my son's face. "No," I said quietly. He glanced up, surprised. "What?" "No, I'm not making pancakes this morning. There's cereal in the pantry." His eyes narrowed. "Are you serious right now? You're really going to make a big deal out of pancakes?" "I'm serious about a lot of things, Michael. We need to talk." "I don't have time for this." He started to turn away, dismissing me like I was an annoying interruption to his schedule. "Make time," I said, my voice stronger than I'd heard it in years. The words came from somewhere deep inside, from that part of me that had been silent for too long. "We need to talk about your plans to take my house." He froze. His face went pale, then red. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I heard Jennifer. I heard everything. About adding your name to the deed, about refinancing, about the beach house, about how I won't be around forever." My hands were shaking, but my voice stayed steady. "About how exhausting I am, how I'm a lot to handle, about how you've been manipulating me to sign over my house." The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer appeared in the doorway, wrapped in the expensive silk robe I'd bought her for Christmas, her face a mask of false concern. "Margaret, you must have misunderstood. We were just discussing options for your future, for your protection." "My protection?" I laughed, a bitter sound that surprised even me. "You want to protect me right out of my own house. You want to protect me from having any security or independence. You want to protect yourselves to my equity and my property." "That's not fair," Michael said, his voice rising. "We've been helping you. We moved in to keep you company, to make sure you weren't lonely." "Is that what you call it? Because I call it using me. I call it taking advantage. I call it treating me like an ATM and a maid service. I call it planning to steal my house while pretending to care about my well-being." Emma wandered in, drawn by the raised voices. For the first time in months, she wasn't looking at her phone. Her eyes were wide, uncertain, as she looked between the adults in the room. "What's going on?" she asked. I turned to my granddaughter. This girl I'd loved from the moment she was born. Emma, honey, when was the last time you and I actually talked? Not me asking if you needed something, but really talked. She shifted uncomfortably, wrapping her arms around herself. I don't know, Grandma. Exactly. Because you've all been so busy treating me like furniture that you forgot I'm a person. A person who owns this house, who's been paying for everything, who's been cooking and cleaning and doing laundry like some kind of servant. Mom, you're being dramatic, Michael said. But there was uncertainty in his eyes now. Nobody's forcing you to do anything. No, you're just making me feel guilty if I don't. You're making me feel like I'm the problem. But I'm done, Michael. I'm done being used. I'm done being manipulated. I'm done being erased in my own home. Jennifer's mask slipped. Used? We saved you from being alone in this big house. We gave up our own independence to be here for you. You gave up your condo because you couldn't afford it, I shot back. You needed a place to live, and I opened my doors. But that wasn't enough, was it? You wanted my money, my time, my house, everything. You wanted to take and take and take until there was nothing left of me. The argument escalated, voices rising and falling, accusations flying. But through it all, I held firm. For the first time in my life, I wasn't backing down. I wasn't apologizing. I wasn't smoothing things over to keep the peace. I was fighting for myself, for my dignity, for my right to exist in my own home. Finally, exhausted and emotional, we all retreated to separate corners of the house. I went to my bedroom and locked the door, something I'd never done before. My hands were shaking and my heart was racing, but beneath the fear and anger, there was something else. Something that felt almost like freedom. I spent that day on the phone. First, I called my lawyer, old Mr. Patterson, who'd handled Robert's will. My hands trembled as I dialed his number, and I almost hung up 3 times before the call connected. What was I doing? Was I really about to evict my own son? Mr. Patterson's secretary put me through immediately. Margaret, he said warmly. It's been a while. How are you doing? I took a deep breath and told him everything. About Michael and Jennifer moving in, about the overheard conversations, about the text messages, about the financial manipulation. My voice cracked several times, but I pushed through. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end. Margaret, Mr. Patterson finally said, his voice gentle but firm. I'm going to tell you something I probably should have said years ago. I've seen this pattern before, too many times. Adult children who view their parents as resources rather than people. What you're describing isn't just disrespect. It's financial exploitation and possibly elder abuse. The words hit me like a physical blow. Elder abuse. My own son. You have every right to ask them to leave, he continued. This is your property. You owe them nothing legally. As your attorney, I actually advise you to document everything. Every withdrawal from your accounts, every promise they made, every piece of evidence of their intentions. Take screenshots of those text messages. Write down dates and times of conversations you've overheard. If this escalates, and I pray it doesn't, you'll need that documentation. Do you really think it could escalate that badly? I asked, my voice small. I hope not. But I've practiced law for 43 years, Margaret. I've seen families torn apart over far less. What concerns me is the systematic nature of this. They didn't just ask you for help. They moved in, isolated you, worked to gain access to your assets, and made plans for your property behind your back. That's not desperation. That's calculation. After we discussed the legal process for eviction, he paused. Margaret, I know this is painful. Robert was my friend for over 30 years. I was at your wedding. I watched Michael grow up, and I'm telling you, Robert would be proud of you for standing up for yourself. He worried about this. He told me once, not long before he passed, that he was afraid Michael had become too entitled, too focused on what he could get rather than what he could give. I hung up feeling validated but also profoundly sad. Then I called the bank. The conversation with my bank took over an hour. They had to review months of transactions, freeze my old accounts, set up new ones. The security questions felt invasive. Do you feel safe in your home? Has anyone threatened you? Do you have somewhere else to stay if needed? I kept saying I was fine, but was I? Then I called a locksmith. I need my locks changed, I said. All of them. Front door, back door, the garage, everything. When would you like us to come out? The woman on the phone asked. As soon as they're gone, I said. I'll call you back with the exact date. With each call, I felt stronger, more certain. This was my house, my life. And I was taking it back. That evening, I found Michael in the living room, staring out the window. For a moment, he looked like the little boy who used to curl up next to me on the couch, asking me to read just one more story. My heart softened slightly, but then I remembered his words from yesterday. Her house, her rules. Michael, I said quietly, I need you and your family to move out. He spun around, his face a mixture of shock and anger. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. You have until the end of the month. That gives you 4 weeks to find somewhere else to live. Mom, come on, don't do this. We're family. Exactly, we're family. And family doesn't treat each other the way you've been treating me. Family doesn't plot to steal someone's house. Family doesn't forget birthdays and ignore illnesses and take without ever giving back. We give back, he protested weakly. But his voice lacked conviction, and we both knew it. Really? Tell me one thing you've done for me in the last 6 months that wasn't because I asked, or because you needed something from me first. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His eyes darted around the room, as if looking for an answer written on the walls. The silence stretched between us like a canyon, wide and deep and impossible to cross. That's what I thought, I said softly. I love you, Michael. I will always love you. But I can't let you treat me like this anymore. I deserve better. I deserve respect. I deserve to be seen and valued, not used and discarded. The next few days were tense. The house felt like a pressure cooker, ready to explode at any moment. We moved around each other like chess pieces, strategic and careful, avoiding direct contact when possible. Jennifer tried negotiation first. She sat me down at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I hadn't asked for and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Margaret, let's talk about this reasonably. We're all adults here. I think there's been a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, I said quietly. But there is, she insisted, her voice taking on that patronizing tone she used when she thought I was being difficult. You overheard a private conversation and took it out of context. Michael and I were just exploring options for everyone's financial security. It's called estate planning, Margaret. Responsible adults do it. Responsible adults don't plot to take someone's house while pretending to care for them. Her smile faltered. We do care for you. We moved in here to help you. No, you moved in here because you needed a place to live. There's a difference. When negotiation didn't work, she tried tears. I came home from grocery shopping one afternoon to find her sobbing at the kitchen table, her phone positioned suspiciously nearby, probably recording or ready to post to social media. How can you do this to us? She wailed. We've given up everything to be here for you. Emma had to change schools. Michael had to find a new job. And this is how you repay us? I set down my groceries and looked at her calmly. Jennifer, Michael didn't find a new job. He got fired from his old one for poor performance. You didn't change Emma's school out of kindness. You changed it because you couldn't afford the private school anymore. And I'm not repaying anything because you haven't given me anything except stress and heartache. She stopped crying immediately, her eyes going cold. And that's when the threats started. You're going to die alone, she hissed at me one afternoon, her mask completely dropped, her true feelings finally exposed. No one will want to be around a bitter old woman who threw out her own family. You think your little book club friends will be there for you when you're sick, when you can't take care of yourself? They'll disappear, and you'll have no one. No one. Her words were designed to hurt, to scare me into submission. And a few months ago, they would have worked. But now, having seen her true nature, they just made me sad. Sad for her, for the bitterness she carried, for the way she viewed relationships as transactions. Michael alternated between anger and guilt trips, reminding me of all the times he'd needed me, as if that somehow justified how he'd been treating me now. Remember when I was sick in college and you drove 8 hours to bring me soup? He said one evening, finding me in the garden. You stayed with me for 3 days, missing work, taking care of me. Remember? I remember, I said, not looking up from the roses I was pruning. Remember when I got divorced from Sarah and you let me live here for 6 months? You never asked for rent, never complained, just let me heal in my own time. Remember? I remember that too. Then how can you do this? His voice broke. How can you throw me out after everything we've been through? This is how you repay all that love. I set down my pruning shears and looked at him directly. Michael, a mother's love isn't something that needs to be repaid. It's freely given. But that doesn't mean you get to abuse it. Yes, I drove 8 hours when you were sick, because that's what mothers do. But when I was sick last winter, you couldn't be bothered to drive 20 minutes. Yes, I let you live here after your divorce. But you're conflating that kindness with permission to steal from me now. I never stole from you. You took $12,000 from my account without asking. What do you call that? He had no answer. He just turned and walked away, leaving me alone with my roses and my thoughts. But I held firm. I met with Mr. Patterson, who assured me that the house was solely in my name and that I had every right to ask them to leave. I changed my will, removing the clause that left the house to Michael and instead setting up a trust that would ensure my financial security first and foremost. Whatever was left after my needs were met could go to Emma's education fund, bypassing Michael and Jennifer entirely. I also made an appointment at the bank to review my accounts. I was shocked to discover that Michael had been withdrawing money regularly, small amounts that I hadn't noticed, but that added up to several $1,000s over the past 6 months. He had access because I'd added him as a joint account holder years ago, back when Robert was sick and I needed help managing things. Another thing they'd taken advantage of. The bank manager, a young woman named Christina, had looked at the statement with concern. Mrs. Patterson, are you aware of all these withdrawals? They're coded as ATM cash withdrawals, mostly at odd hours. She pointed to the screen, showing withdrawals at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., times when I was always asleep. I had no idea, I admitted, feeling foolish and naive. I'm going to recommend we remove him from the account immediately and issue you a new card. If you suspect elder financial abuse, we can also file a report with Adult Protective Services. Elder financial abuse. The words stung, but they were accurate. My own son had been stealing from me, taking money while I slept, treating my accounts like his personal piggy bank. Mrs. Henderson, my neighbor, became an unexpected ally. She'd been watching the situation unfold and one afternoon invited me over for coffee. Her kitchen was warm and cozy, filled with the smell of fresh baking. Margaret, she said, pouring tea into delicate china cups. I've been wanting to say something for a while now, but I didn't want to interfere. But what your son and his family are doing to you, it's not right. I felt tears prick my eyes. I don't know what to do, Agnes. Part of me thinks I'm being terrible, throwing out my own son. You're not throwing him out. You're asking a grown man to take responsibility for his own life. There's a difference. She patted my hand. You've been a good mother, too good maybe. Sometimes our children need to learn that love isn't the same as being a doormat. Her words resonated deep in my soul. That's exactly what I'd become, a doormat. Someone to be walked on, used, taken for granted. When had that happened? When had I stopped being Margaret Patterson, teacher, wife, individual woman with her own needs and dreams, and become just mom, the person who exists solely to serve others? I thought about my own mother, who died when I was 30. She'd been strong, independent, never taking anything from anyone. I remembered her telling me once, "Margaret, you're too soft-hearted. You need to learn when to say no." I'd dismissed it at the time, thinking she was too harsh, too unloving, but maybe she'd been trying to teach me something important. My mother had immigrated from Poland with nothing but a suitcase and determination. She'd worked 3 jobs to support us after my father died, never asking for help, never complaining. When I'd gotten engaged to Robert, she'd pulled me aside. "Love him with all your heart," she'd said, "but never lose yourself in the process. A woman who has nothing of her own has nothing to give." The weekend before they were scheduled to move out, Jennifer tried one last manipulation. She came to my room with tears streaming down her face, telling me that Emma was devastated, that I was breaking up the family, that Michael was so stressed he could barely function at work. "Please, Margaret," she begged. "Please don't do this. We'll change. We'll be better. Just give us another chance." For a moment, I wavered. The old Margaret wanted to comfort her, to say it was okay, to forget everything and go back to how things were. But then I remembered the text messages, the overheard conversation, the forgotten birthdays and ignored illnesses. I remembered standing in my own kitchen feeling like an intruder. "Jennifer," I said calmly, "if you really cared about keeping this family together, you would have treated me better when you had the chance. This isn't a sudden decision. This is the result of months of disrespect and manipulation, and I'm done." Moving day arrived cold and gray, fitting weather for such a difficult transition. I woke up early before dawn and made myself a pot of strong coffee. I sat at the kitchen table, listening to the house creak and settle, knowing this would be the last morning I'd wake up with them under my roof. Part of me wanted to stay in my room, to hide until it was over. But I'd spent too many months hiding, being invisible. So I got dressed, did my hair, put on my favorite sweater, the blue cashmere one Robert had given me for our 25th anniversary. I wanted to face this moment with dignity. The moving truck arrived at 8 a.m. sharp. I watched from the window as 2 burly men began carrying boxes and furniture down the front walk. Jennifer supervised with a clipboard, checking off items, her face a mask of cold efficiency. Michael moved mechanically, his movements stiff and awkward. Emma kept glancing back at the house, and I wondered what she was thinking. Did she understand? Did she blame me? Would she grow up thinking her grandmother was cruel? I wanted to go out and talk to her, to explain, to make sure she knew I loved her. But Jennifer had made it clear that I was to stay away from Emma, that I'd done enough damage already. So I watched from the window, this granddaughter I'd loved from birth, and I let myself grieve the relationship we might have had. Maybe someday, when she was older, when she could think for herself, we'd have a chance to reconnect. Or maybe this was it, the final chapter, the sad ending to a story that had started with so much hope and promise. The loading took 3 hours. I made myself busy in the back of the house, organizing closets that didn't need organizing, wiping down surfaces that were already clean. Anything to avoid the sound of furniture scraping, boxes thumping, the physical dismantling of their presence in my home. Around 11, there was a crash from upstairs, followed by swearing. I went to investigate and found Michael in his old bedroom, standing amid broken glass. He'd been taking down a framed photo from the wall, the one of him and Robert at his college graduation, and it had slipped from his hands. "I'm sorry," he said, staring at the shattered frame. "I didn't mean to." "It's fine," I said, grabbing a broom from the hallway closet. "Just glass. The photo is what matters." We cleaned up the glass together in silence, our hands moving in practiced coordination, a remnant of years of being mother and son. When we finished, he picked up the photo, now free from its frame, and looked at it for a long moment. "I miss him," Michael said softly. "Dad, I miss him so much." "I do too. He wouldn't be proud of me right now, would he?" I could have lied, could have offered empty comfort, but I owed us both more than that. No, he wouldn't. But that doesn't mean you can't change. That doesn't mean you can't be someone he would be proud of again. Michael nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I really am sorry, Mom. I know you don't believe me, but I am. I don't know when I became this person. I don't know when I stopped being your son and started being this. I know when," I said quietly. "It was gradual. Little choices, little compromises with your integrity. It's easy to slide into selfishness when you're not paying attention. The question is, what are you going to do about it now?" Michael came in one last time, ostensibly to check if they'd forgotten anything, but really, I think, to make one final attempt. "Mom," he said, standing in the hallway that led to his old bedroom upstairs, his voice shaking. "I'm sorry, I am. I know we didn't treat you right. But you're really going to throw away our relationship over this?" "I'm not throwing it away," I said. "I'm saving myself. There's a difference. And maybe, if you think about what happened here, if you really look at how you've been treating me, maybe someday we can rebuild something. But it has to be different. It has to be based on respect." He nodded slowly, tears in his eyes. "I do love you, you know." "I know. I love you too. But love isn't enough when it's one-sided." He walked to the door, then turned back one more time. "If I fix this, if I really change, if I become someone better, will you give me another chance?" I thought about it carefully before answering. "I don't know, Michael. Ask me in a year. Ask me after you've proven, through actions not words, that you've really changed. But right now, I need you to leave. I need you to let me heal." They left, and the house fell silent. For the first few hours, I wandered from room to room, feeling the emptiness. The quiet was both peaceful and unsettling. I was alone, truly alone, for the first time in months. Part of me felt relieved. Part of me felt terrified. What had I done? I stood in Michael's old bedroom, the one he'd slept in as a child before he went to college. The wallpaper still had traces of the glow-in-the-dark stars we'd stuck to the ceiling when he was 7. I'd removed them years ago, but their faint outlines remained, ghosts of happier times. I sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, and let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. That night, I made myself a simple dinner, just scrambled eggs and toast, and ate it at the kitchen table with a book propped up in front of me. I'd forgotten what it felt like to read without interruption, to enjoy a meal without someone asking me for something. It was strange but not unpleasant. The next morning, I woke up early and did something I hadn't done in years. I went for a walk around the neighborhood without telling anyone or asking permission or feeling guilty for taking time for myself. The October air was crisp and clean, and the leaves were beginning to turn brilliant shades of red and gold. Chicago in autumn had always been my favorite, but I'd forgotten how beautiful it could be when you actually took time to notice. Mrs. Henderson waved from her garden, and I stopped to chat. We talked about nothing important, just neighbors sharing a moment, and I realized how isolated I'd become. I'd been so focused on Michael and his family that I'd neglected other relationships, other possibilities for connection. Over the next few weeks, I began to rediscover myself. It wasn't easy. Some days I woke up feeling empowered and strong. Other days I woke up second-guessing everything, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. Those were the hardest days, when the silence of the house felt less like peace and more like loneliness. But I pushed through. I joined a book club at the local library. The first meeting was terrifying. I almost turned around 3 times before I finally walked through the door. But the women there welcomed me warmly, and we spent 2 hours discussing a novel about resilience and second chances. It felt appropriate, like the universe was sending me a message. I started taking a watercolor painting class at the community center on Tuesday afternoons. I'd always been interested in art, but had never made time for it, always too busy taking care of everyone else. Now, I had time. I had permission to pursue my own interests. The first painting I created was terrible, all muddy colors and awkward brush strokes, but the instructor, a patient woman named Lisa, encouraged me to keep trying. "Art isn't about perfection," she said. "It's about expression." I reconnected with old friends from my teaching days, women I'd lost touch with over the years. There was Susan, who'd taught English down the hall, and Dorothy, who'd been the school librarian for 30 years. We met for coffee, for lunch, for walks in the park. They welcomed me back without judgment, without conditions. They listened to my story and shared their own experiences of setting boundaries with adult children, of learning to prioritize their own needs after years of self-sacrifice. One of these friends was Patricia, who'd taught mathematics in the classroom next to mine for 20 years. We met for coffee at a little cafe downtown, and within minutes it was like no time had passed at all. "Margaret," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand, "I've missed you. Where have you been?" I told her everything, the whole story spilling out over cappuccinos and biscotti. She listened without interrupting, her face showing a range of emotions from anger to sadness to pride. When I finished, she said, "I'm so proud of you for standing up for yourself. I know how hard that must have been." "Was I wrong?" I asked. "Did I do the right thing?" "Margaret, you taught children for 35 years. You dedicated your life to helping others grow and learn. You deserve the same care and respect you gave to countless students. Your son should know better. You absolutely did the right thing." I also began to reclaim my house. Every room held memories of the months they'd lived here, and I needed to replace those memories with new ones, better ones. I painted the guest room a cheerful yellow, something Jennifer had always hated, calling it too bright and unsophisticated. But I loved it. The sunny color made me smile every time I walked past. I rearranged the furniture in the living room, putting my favorite reading chair by the window where the afternoon light was best. Jennifer had always positioned the furniture to face the television, making the room feel like a theater instead of a home. Now it was arranged for conversation, for reading, for actually living. I planted bulbs in the garden, daffodils and tulips that would bloom in the spring, a promise to myself that I would still be here, still thriving, still creating beauty. As I worked in the soil, my hands dirty and my back aching pleasantly from the labor, I felt more connected to myself than I had in years. This was my earth, my garden, my future taking root. The financial audit of my accounts revealed that Michael had withdrawn over $12,000 in 6 months. I removed him from all my accounts and set up automatic payments for my bills. I also consulted with a financial advisor about my pension and investments. It turned out I was in better shape than I'd thought. If I was careful, I could live comfortably for many years, maybe even travel a bit. The financial advisor, a kind man named David who reminded me of Robert, had spread out papers across his desk. "Mrs. Patterson, you've been very responsible with your savings. Your pension is solid. Your investments are conservative but stable. You have more security than you realize." He'd looked at me seriously. "The withdrawals your son made, they were problematic, but they didn't devastate you. You're going to be fine." Hearing those words, I'd felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I wasn't destitute. I wasn't helpless. I was going to be fine. Thanksgiving came. That holiday I'd supposedly been too fragile to attend. Instead of spending it alone feeling sorry for myself, I volunteered at a local shelter, serving meals to people who had nowhere else to go. The gratitude in their eyes, the simple human connection, filled something in me that had been empty for too long. I realized that I didn't need my family to make me feel valued. I could find meaning and purpose on my own terms. There was a young mother there, maybe 25, with 2 small children. She reminded me of myself at that age, struggling but determined, trying to create a better life despite overwhelming obstacles. As I served her plate, piling it high with turkey and stuffing and all the traditional sides, she looked up at me with tired eyes and said, "Thank you. You don't know what this means to us." I squeezed her hand gently. "I'm just glad I can help." And I meant it with every fiber of my being. This, right here, this was meaningful. This was purpose. This was what life should be about. But just when I was beginning to feel settled, confident in my decision, Jennifer struck one final blow. She created a social media post, carefully crafted to make me look like a monster. She wrote about how I'd thrown them out on the street, how I'd cut them off financially without warning, how I was destroying Emma's sense of security and stability. She didn't mention the money they'd taken, the plans to steal my house, or the months of disrespect. She painted herself as the victim and me as a cruel, heartless old woman. The post spread through our extended family and community like wildfire. My phone rang constantly with relatives I hadn't heard from in years, calling to express their disappointment, to tell me I should be ashamed, to demand that I apologize and make things right. Some of the women from my book club gave me strange looks, having seen the post. Even Mrs. Henderson seemed uncertain, asking gently if there was another side to the story. The public humiliation was devastating. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if everything I'd been trying to build was crumbling around me. I wanted to defend myself, to tell my side, to show everyone the bank statements and the text messages and the evidence of their manipulation. But something held me back. Maybe it was dignity. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the realization that people would believe what they wanted to believe regardless of the truth. I called Mr. Patterson and we discussed my options. I could sue for defamation, but that would only drag things out and create more drama. I could make a public statement, but that felt beneath me. In the end, I decided to do something different. I wrote a private letter to Jennifer, not angry or accusatory, but clear and firm. "Jennifer," I wrote, "I know you feel hurt and angry. I understand that from your perspective I've been unreasonable, but the truth is that you and Michael took advantage of my generosity for months. You made plans to take my house. You withdrew money without asking. You treated me like a servant in my own home. I have documentation of all of this, and I'm keeping it safely stored with my lawyer. I'm not interested in a public battle. I'm not interested in destroying your reputation the way you've tried to destroy mine. I'm simply interested in living the rest of my life with dignity and respect. If you choose to continue this campaign against me, I will be forced to defend myself with evidence. But I'd prefer we both move forward quietly, separately, and with whatever grace we can muster." I never got a response to that letter, but the social media attacks stopped. The phone calls from relatives tapered off. The whispers and strange looks gradually faded, and slowly, carefully, I rebuilt my sense of self. One afternoon in December, I was at the grocery store when I ran into Emma. She was with a friend, both girls bundled up in winter coats and scarves. When she saw me, she hesitated, and I braced myself for coldness or anger. Instead, she approached me shyly. "Hi, Grandma," she said softly. "Hi, sweetheart. How are you?" "I'm okay. We moved into an apartment near my school. It's smaller, but it's nice, I guess." "That's good. I'm glad you're settling in." There was an awkward pause. Then Emma blurted out, "I'm sorry about the stuff my mom posted online. I told her it wasn't cool." My heart swelled. "Thank you, Emma. That means a lot to me." "I don't really understand everything that happened," she admitted. "Mom and Dad say one thing, but I don't know. It just feels like everyone's mad at everyone. I chose my words carefully. Sometimes adults make mistakes and sometimes relationships get complicated. But I want you to know that I love you very much, and if you ever want to talk or spend time together, my door is always open. On your terms, when you're ready. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and then her friend pulled her away, and she was gone. But the encounter left me feeling hopeful. Maybe not everything was lost. Maybe, in time, some bridges could be rebuilt. Christmas came, and I spent it at Mrs. Henderson's house with a group of neighbors, most of them also older, some widowed, some never married, all of us creating our own chosen family. We exchanged small gifts, shared a potluck dinner, and sang carols around her piano. It wasn't the Christmas I'd imagined, but it was warm and genuine. And I felt more welcomed there than I had in my own home with Michael and his family. There was something magical about that evening. Mrs. Henderson played Silent Night on her old upright piano, and we all sang, our voices blending in harmony. I looked around at these people, these near strangers who had become dear friends, and I felt a sense of belonging I hadn't experienced in years. This was what family should feel like, mutual, reciprocal, based on genuine care rather than obligation or manipulation. As the new year approached, I found myself thinking about resolutions, about who I wanted to be going forward. I'd spent so much of my life defining myself through others, through my roles as wife, mother, grandmother. But who was Margaret Patterson when you stripped away all those titles? I decided to find out. I signed up for a photography course, something I'd always been interested in but never pursued. I started volunteering regularly at the shelter, finding deep satisfaction in helping others without any expectation of return. I even began dating. Awkwardly at first, meeting a widower named James at my book club. We went for coffee, then dinner, then a movie. Nothing serious, nothing heavy, just the pleasant company of another human being who treated me with kindness and respect. James was a retired engineer, tall and thin, with kind eyes and a gentle sense of humor. Our first date had been endearingly awkward, both of us nervous like teenagers. "I haven't done this in 40 years, he'd admitted, laughing. "I have no idea what I'm doing." "That makes two of us," I'd said, and we'd both relaxed, realizing we were in this together. The house felt different now. It was mine again, truly mine, not just legally, but emotionally. I could leave dishes in the sink if I wanted to. I could watch whatever I liked on television. I could eat cereal for dinner or stay up reading until 2 in the morning. Small freedoms, perhaps, but they added up to something profound: autonomy. Spring arrived with the promised blooms from my fall planting. The daffodils pushed up through the soil, bright and cheerful, and I photographed them as part of my photography homework. The tulips followed, deep reds and soft pinks, and I cut some to bring inside, arranging them in a vase on the kitchen table. One afternoon, as I was working in the garden, a car pulled up. My heart skipped when I saw Michael get out, alone this time. He walked slowly up the driveway, his hands in his pockets, looking uncertain. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. "Michael." I stood up, brushing dirt from my gardening gloves. "The garden looks nice. You've been working hard." "I have. It's been therapeutic." We stood there awkwardly, the space between us filled with months of hurt and silence. Finally, he said, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about how we treated you, and I want to say I'm sorry. Really, genuinely sorry." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation, but all I saw was genuine regret. "What changed?" I asked. "Therapy," he admitted with a small laugh. "Jennifer and I started going. The move was hard, harder than we expected. We're struggling financially without your support. And the therapist asked me to really think about how we'd been treating you, to put myself in your shoes. It was painful to realize how selfish we'd been." "It was," I agreed. "It was very painful." "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," he continued. I don't even know if you can forgive me at all, but I wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what we did, and I'm trying to be better." I pulled off my gardening gloves and sat down on the porch steps, gesturing for him to join me. "Michael, I never stopped loving you, but I had to stop letting you take advantage of that love. I had to respect myself enough to say no. I know, and you were right to do it. It's just hard to admit that your mom had to teach you a lesson about respect when you're 42 years old." We sat in silence for a moment, watching a robin hop across the lawn. Then I said, "I'm willing to rebuild our relationship, but it has to be different. It has to be based on mutual respect. I'm not your ATM. I'm not your maid. I'm your mother, and I deserve to be treated with dignity." "I understand," he said, "and I want that too. I want my son, your grandson you haven't met yet, to know his grandmother, but the real you, not the doormat we made you into." My breath caught. "You have a son?" "Born 3 weeks ago, Robert Michael. We named him after Dad and me." He pulled out his phone, showing me photos of a tiny wrinkled newborn. "I wanted to tell you sooner, but I didn't know how. I didn't know if you'd even want to know." Tears filled my eyes. "Of course I want to know. I'm your mother. I'm his grandmother." We talked for over an hour, really talked, the way we hadn't in years. He told me about their financial struggles, about how his pride had kept him from being honest about their situation, about how Jennifer's family dynamics had created unhealthy patterns that they'd replicated with me. I told him about my loneliness, about the volunteer work that had given me purpose, about the photography class and the book club, and the small life I was building for myself. When he left, we hugged, tentatively at first, then more firmly. "Can I call you next week?" he asked. "I'd like that." As I watched him drive away, I felt something shift in my chest. It wasn't full forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't a return to the way things were, and it never would be. But it was a beginning, a small green shoot pushing up through the hard soil of our broken relationship. Over the following months, Michael and I talked regularly on the phone. The conversations were different now, more balanced. He asked about my life, not just to be polite, but because he genuinely wanted to know. I asked about his, offering support without offering money. We set boundaries, clear ones, and we both respected them. Jennifer reached out eventually too, though her apology was more stilted, less genuine. I accepted it with grace, but remained cautious. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. Emma started visiting occasionally, usually with Michael, and those visits were sweet and uncomplicated. We baked cookies together, looked through old photo albums, talked about her school and friends and dreams for the future. I met my grandson in June, a chubby-cheeked baby named Robert, after his grandfather. Holding him in my arms, I felt a rush of love, but also a clarity I hadn't had before. I would love this child, but I wouldn't sacrifice myself for him. I would be present, but I wouldn't be taken advantage of. I would give generously, but not to my own detriment. Little Robert had Robert's eyes, that same deep brown that had looked at me with love for 35 years. I traced his tiny features with my finger, marveling at the miracle of new life, of second chances, of hope renewed. "Hello, little one," I whispered. "I'm your grandmother, and I'm going to teach you something important. Love yourself as much as you love others. It's the only way to truly be free." As I sit here now on my porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, I hold a glass of wine and reflect on this journey. The photograph albums are put away, but their memories live differently in my mind now. Not as sources of pain or loss, but as chapters in a longer story, a story that isn't finished yet. I think about the woman I was a year ago, standing in her kitchen being told that this wasn't her house anymore. I think about the fear and hurt and anger. And then I think about who I am now, stronger, more independent, more whole. I learned that love without respect is not enough. I learned that giving without boundaries is not generosity, but self-destruction. I learned that it's never too late to reclaim your life. The house behind me is quiet but not empty. It's filled with my things, my choices, my peace. The garden blooms with flowers I planted. The walls display photographs I took. The shelves hold books I chose. Every corner reflects who I am, not who others need me to be. I wonder sometimes if I should have done things differently. If there was a way to maintain the relationship without standing up for myself so forcefully. But then I remember the hollowness, the invisibility, the feeling of being erased in my own home. And I know I made the right choice. The question I want to leave you with is this. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Have you ever given so much of yourself that there was nothing left? Have you ever had to choose between being loved and being respected? If my story resonates with you, if you've lived something similar or know someone who has, please share your experience in the comments. Sometimes we need to know we're not alone in these struggles. And if you found value in my story, if it touched your heart or made you think, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. These stories matter. They remind us that it's never too late to reclaim our dignity, to set boundaries, to choose ourselves. And maybe, just maybe, by sharing these experiences, we can help someone else find the courage to do the same. The sunset is fading now, and the first stars are beginning to appear. Tomorrow I have my photography class, then lunch with James, then volunteering at the shelter. My life is full again, wonderfully full, but this time it's full of things I chose, relationships I value, moments that nourish me instead of depleting me. I am 71 years old, and I am finally, truly, completely free at last.